Hi, so my name is Skylar Vanderveen, and I'm 23 years old, and I'm from Laguna Beach, California. I've been an auxiliar de conversación for 6 months, and this is my video for my teaching portfolio, just to sum up where I'm at so far, some of my goals for the rest of the year, um, and hopefully what I say will be enough to help me renew my position at my school. Um, anyways, I'm 23 years old and I'm from Laguna Beach, California. So growing up in Laguna Beach, I obviously spent a lot of time at the beach. Um, but I also had two parents who were big readers and who instilled a love for language in me at a young age. I was always a big reader and still am, and took an interest in learning another language, Spanish, because I was from California, throughout my years of schooling, from middle school all the way to college. And I think it helped influence my decision to become an auxiliar because I was so interested in um, how we use language to form communities, how we use language to communicate, how we use language to make friends, um, and how we use language to empathize with others. And I think that planted a seed that got me interested in the auxiliars program. My parents were also always very adventurous. My dad traveled a lot for work and took us on a lot of international vacations whenever he could. Um, so when I was finally old enough to leave home myself, I kind of knew I wanted to get far away from home. My brother goes to school in Paris. I went to school in Ohio, not quite as far, but I went to Kenyon College there in Ohio and studied English literature. And when I began my first adventure away from home, I made a lot of friends from the other side of the country and some international friends. And it served me well and was a positive enough experience that um, I wanted to go farther. So I kind of deepened, I think, my interest in English as a language by studying literature because I had to learn a lot of nuts and bolts of the language to make coherent arguments about how authors were writing certain things using different grammatical techniques, different oratical techniques, and other things. And it got me very interested in learning more about it. I figured I could teach it. And already having been far from home, I decided why not go farther and go to Spain, especially when I had some Spanish under my belt. So I had actually talked to one of my friends who had done the auxiliar program for 2 years before I came. So I had some expectations entering the program. The positive ones that I couldn't really imagine because I hadn't actually left yet were that I was going to have a phenomenal time in Spain, that supposedly I would come to love this imaginary group of students, which was weird. I couldn't imagine being in the front of a classroom because I had been so rambunctious in middle school and elementary school that just being a teacher sounded strange to me. On the negative end, I had heard that disciplinary issues can be tough in Spain. Some of the kids can be very wild. I'd also heard they use the book a lot. So fortunately, I am having a phenomenal time in Spain. I do love my students, and the disciplinary issues are largely managed by the teachers, and they manage them very well. They've been doing this job for a very long time, and not surprisingly, know a thing or two. And sometimes they do use the book a little bit, but it's not egregious, and it helps me. Oftentimes, the way we use the book actually is it helps us structure the subjects we're going to teach for the year. And then we actually go and build a more specific lesson plan for the kids. So in that way, it's been kind of helpful, actually, especially as a new teacher, because I would have to spend many hours having to structure how my whole year was going to go. I mean, probably days structuring how the whole year was going to go if I were to just try and make a whole English lesson plan from scratch. So with that, I'll start talking about my school. I've been assigned to SAPE San Miguel Arcangel, which is a bilingual primary school just northwest of Madrid in Morazarzal. The school is small. There are about 70 to 80 kids per grade, and I have been assigned to the 3 sixth grade classes in the school. Understandably, they're in 6th grade, They are very much more concerned with what their peers are thinking about them um, and how they stand with their peers than how they stand with their teachers and how they stand with authority figures like adults and like auxiliaries. Um, and they're testing authority a lot, right? They're sort of starting to get the idea that authority isn't something that should just be given, um, and that you are probably a person just like them, and that if they're going to give you a lot of hours of their week to you, you should probably earn them. They're also just testing authority and sort of trying to figure out where it lies. So they just do things to test boundaries and to discover where boundaries lie. Um, but generally, they're very funny and very good kids. Certainly more friendly than the sixth graders that certainly friendlier than the sixth grader I was and the sixth graders that I grew up with. I think generally, I don't see any bullying. I don't see. They seem to communicate their emotions in a really not always a mature way, but they communicate their emotions well for a sixth grade age, um, which is pretty impressive. They're obviously very funny, and I like them and they like me. I can go to school feeling not great, and just them being excited to see me walk in the door and just getting to work with them um, often can sometimes turn my mood around if I'm not excited. I'm pretty excited to go to school, but occasionally there are hard days and they usually make it better. Um, so I'll talk a little bit about what I've done now. Um, so I'm still figuring out my role, um, but I set out a couple simple goals for myself. So there's a set of rules for an art school written by Sister Karita Kent. It's the Immaculate Heart College Art Department rules, and it's rules for the teachers and the students. Um, and rule two is that the general duties of rule three. I'll start with rule three. The general duties of a teacher are to pull as much out of your students as possible. Um, and the way I read that is that you are trying to obviously get your students to produce as much um, passionate schoolwork as you can get them to muster. At a sixth grade age, that might not be very much because they're interested in doing other things outside of school. I would say it's also you're trying to pull as much out of your students as in you're trying not to teach them to close up and be apathetic. I think you're trying to get your students emotionally and passionately engaged in their education. Um, so with that said, I set a couple simple goals. So I wanted to bore the students as little as possible. It's very hard to pull a lot out of your students if you are basically turning their brains into porridge every day. So the way I try not to bore them is I always try and look for new things, and I try new things um, every day with them. I try and look for new games and not just play hangman. Um, and another thing, it also helps me enter the classroom as a researcher, which is important because I'm learning how to do this job. So coming in and trying things means that my failures are somewhat productive, and I'm not just coming in and failing by coming in and doing the bare minimum, boring my students, not teaching them English, and wasting my life in a classroom that I don't want to be in. So coming in and trying new things helps keep the job interesting. It seems to do a lot more for the students. It definitely does a lot for me. So that was the first goal. Try to bore the students as little as possible by trying new things. The second thing is just basic professionalism. I know my hair is a little bit mussed in this video. I've just come back from teaching PE all day. That's another subject that I teach that I forgot to mention. But I always try and set a good example by showing up prepared with all of my materials ready, having gotten enough sleep, having eaten breakfast, and showing up on time. I know that and I would say that the passing periods of my school overlap a little bit into the next period sometimes. Certain teachers have different policies on that. Some teachers are fine with showing up to class a little bit late and leaving their previous class a little bit late. Other teachers are pretty punctual and want their full 45 minutes. I always try and be punctual. I don't think there's an excuse for me to be late. And I try and show that to the students to help just establish a regular atmosphere where as soon as we walk into the class, it's a place to learn. and it's a place to get down to business. Also to have fun, but a certain kind of fun. Um, always, always be enthusiastic when I can, and even if I'm not, appear enthusiastic. Something I've learned and kind of knew from the outset, but like body language and facial expressions are huge cues for kids, especially kids, because they're so receptive. And I want to bring as much positive energy into that classroom as I can. It's not always the kids' responsibility to be happy, but as a teacher, it certainly is my responsibility to come in looking motivated and as happy as I can be. Um, because I don't think the kids could forgive me, and I don't think I could forgive the kids if I came in unmotivated every day and gave off that environment and created an environment that encouraged apathy. I think that would be pretty miserable. Um, and then something else, I try and earn my authority every day. I understand sometimes as a teacher, you kind of need to walk in and embody kind of charge and stuff like that. But I think if I don't walk in the room and work really hard immediately to get the students interested in what I'm teaching, and if I can't demonstrate to them that what I'm saying is worth their time, maybe I don't deserve it. And frankly, if I'm not coming in prepared and I'm not coming in working hard to earn their attention, working hard for them, I don't think I deserve their authority. And if they feel I don't deserve it, then they're probably right. So that's another thing is you can't manufacture trust in a classroom. You really have to earn that every day. You can only demand obedience, and I don't think that's a good way to run a classroom, mostly because sixth graders aren't particularly inclined to be obedient already, and trying to muscularly enforce that tends to just make it miserable. And then enjoy the work. I think a lot of this comes more easily if you actually walk in and enjoy the work. And I really try to. I try not to make it all about standards. And that's I think that's helpful. I think that's good. I think coming in and taking some time to have a laugh and taking some time to maybe deviate from the lesson plan and talk about something a little more interesting that's going on in the lesson that the students are more interested in, and then finding your way back to what you're going to say is good. And it helps. I think it helps make the lesson sink in a little bit more, and it makes it more interesting for the kids. Goals for my students. I want them to pull as much from each other as possible, and I want them to pull as much out of me as possible. So I want them to use me as a resource for English as much as they can, and to get as much out of me as I can, to the point that they exhaust my knowledge on the subject if they can. And I want them to pull as much out of each other as they can. Like, I want them to be a community of learners who push each other and encourage each other to do the work. So a really basic goal for them is I want them to improve their ability to receive and produce English really easy. Like that's a good way to pull things out of me, is to improve your English so that you can speak better with me and to demonstrate that you're learning. I want them to pass their exams. A lot of kids are taking the PET and the CET, so I obviously want them to pass that so they can stay in the bilingual English program. I want them to enjoy English too. I would feel really, sometimes maybe someone just isn't as interested in languages. I didn't major in a foreign language, so I obviously wasn't, although I was still interested in Spanish and some other ones. But I do want them to get enough out of it that they can tell their parents honestly and their friends, no, I like going to English. It's an interesting course. I learn a lot. I also want them to think for themselves, which means I want them to hold me accountable. I want them to understand the limitations of their education even while I'm teaching them, so that they can demand more and always figure out ways to make it better for themselves. I want them to be invested in their education. I think that's an important part of thinking for yourself. So it's a lot to put on sixth graders, but I think if you can make them enjoy learning and can encourage them to take some charge, some initiative in directing their own learning, that they'll educate themselves better, they'll hold you accountable to be a better educator, and they'll help their classmates a lot more because they'll get passionate about what they're learning. Okay. So, that being said, despite setting those goals for myself and setting those goals for my student, I would say 6 months is still not enough time to become a good teacher or even like a great language assistant. I would say I'm still figuring out my role. Um, but some of the things I've done in my school is I have helped develop the natural science curriculum for the sixth graders this year, and most of that has involved me doing the research for the teacher. She likes to do more of the activities and other things without me, but she has me do a lot of reading and video watching to find materials that she can use to show the kids, so I help them with their receptive skills a little more. I've also developed a few activities for the normal English classroom pertaining to the present continuous and other things. But I've done a lot more preparing the kids for the Cambridge PET and for the PET and CET exams. So obviously, because I speak English so clearly, and because their examiners will be native English speakers, I've been helping mostly with the speaking part of the PET and CET exams. So this includes like a 3-part scheme for part 2 of the PET exam. I help the kids. It's a part of the exam where they need to solve a problem together. Usually, like you ask them, there's a group of Australian teenagers coming to Spain in the spring. They're going to be visiting all parts of the country. What are the most important things they should bring? Talk amongst yourselves and decide that. That's a really hard prompt just to give a group of A2 speakers, especially speakers as self-conscious as middle schoolers. So I've helped them do that by basically saying, okay, here's how you're going to structure this conversation. First, you need to offer a couple different ideas. So you need to offer ideas about the clothing the Australians could wear. You need to offer ideas about the technology they should bring, the amount of money they should bring, a couple other things. I'm like, okay, come up with 2 or 3 ideas each. Then, once you've introduced ideas, that's the first part, you both need to evaluate which ideas are the best ones. So maybe choose 2 ideas, maybe 3 ideas from the 6 or so you put forth. And then finally, and this is the hardest part actually, because they can actually produce ideas and develop and evaluate ideas easily, but they have a lot of trouble closing the conversation naturally. So I have to use a lot of suggestions for how to close the conversation naturally. Obviously, I do other things. I give them useful phrases that they can use, and stock phrases like when they're discussing which is best to their partner. Good idea, but I think do would be better because with the sound effects included because it's more fun for them. And for the CET, I've had students actually make some of their own materials for the test because they just don't always have an idea of what, like there's a question and answer segment where they're just not sure what some of the materials are, and I kind of help them look at material, like commercial objects that they have to create, like flyers and stuff. Say, okay, now you guys have to make your own, and that actually helps them think about what kind of questions to ask about the different materials they're examining and other things. I also have helped structure the writing part of the exam. I've provided a very basic template for how to write a professional email, like they're supposed to, or a letter to a friend. It's pretty easy. But one of the more difficult ones I had to do was I had to help them tell a story, because you're basically teaching creative writing at that point. But I'd read some Aristotle, so I helped them set up a prompt pretty easily. I just said, look, you need to introduce your setting. Just tell me where, when, who, why, what it is. Just lay it all out for me. And then you need to introduce a problem. And it could be a made-up story you're telling, or it could be a story from your life. But the way we tell stories is we usually introduce a problem that needs to get solved, because then the readers are interested in solving the problem. So I helped them do that, and I did it by telling a story about my cat. But usually I say, yeah. So there's your first scene is your expositional scene where you lay out everything that's happening in the context for the story. Then you introduce the problem. And the rest of the story is basically about how you went about solving the problem and the different challenges you had solving it.
And the more challenges there are, usually the better the story is. From there, you've got to write the end. And you can literally define the ending as just this is the part of the story where nothing comes after it. But I explain usually a good ending tells us um, where everyone is at the end of the story. How are they emotionally? What are they doing? Did anything change? Is someone no longer with you at the end of the story? So those are all important things that I've done. And I've also done cultural presentations for my learners. I've done a Martin Luther King Day presentation. I did a presentation on the Old West. Um, I've helped them prepare presentations on their sports heroes and other things. So that's another aspect that I do. Part of that cultural presentation is this is something extracurricular I do outside of class. I danced in college, and I've really enjoyed helping the students choreograph things. So one example was for our English Day, which is a day that celebrates usually a different region that speaks English natively. Um, I taught them a couple different line dances. They're not genuine line dances, um, but they were pretty fun. And I did a line dance with the teachers. There's a video to that you can see. And I also helped for their Christmas production. The school does a Christmas song and dance production every holiday season. I helped them do some different dances and other things. So all that being said, if there was one thing to leave, I guess, this video with, it's been just a really crucial assumption that I've walked into the classroom every day with. And it's that I try and walk in and just assume I don't know very much. It helps me pay attention to when students aren't receptive. It helps me approach the classroom as a researcher, right? Because I am not a teacher. At the end of the day, I'm learning how to be a teacher, so it helps me take advice from my teachers better by just not walking in and assuming I know something. It helps me pay attention to my students and notice and seeing where my lesson plan is maybe falling short, right? Because that's you have to. It's a weird balance. You have to walk in kind of confidently knowing nothing, but it helps me see where my lesson plan is falling short because I'm assuming, well, maybe this whole lesson plan is bad. And so I kind of carefully see what works and what doesn't. And and it helps me kind of earn my authority. I'm like I walk in it helps me earn my authority in part because I come in with the goodwill of saying of believing myself to be learning as much as the students. I'm learning quite a bit just working with kids. And it helps because sometimes I think people walk in and very quickly assume that the lesson plan they've prepared or whatever is just going to be great for the kids and they know what is best for the kids immediately. And that's not always the case. I think sometimes the kids actually despite their young age, have a pretty good understanding of what interests them um, and, and have a pretty good understanding um, of the fact that they're giving so many hours of their week to people who don't always care about them in public school systems and who aren't always using their time very well in public school systems. So I try and walk in and not just steal that time. I try and walk in and assume I'm learning with them and assume that my lesson plan might not be very good, so I'm ready to change it. I'm ready to adapt it to their needs and their interests so that they have more fun learning it. So that's something I would say is just assume you don't know anything. Assume you're still learning. Because there will be times when you have to assume control, and it's better when you don't have to do that as often. So I've had a phenomenal time in the auxiliary hour program. I hope I can renew later, and I hope you guys have enjoyed learning a little bit about my experiences as an aux, and I hope you are interested in some of the things that I've talked about that I've done in the classroom. I've linked to some of them here. Take a look for yourselves. All right, thank you. Bye.